Hello, my name's Chris Blask. I am your host once again for another episode of The Inevitability Curve, where we take interesting topics and try to look at where they came from, what they look like now, and perhaps what they look like going forward. To do this, we bring in interesting folks like we have today, my good friend Peter Jukes. Peter, how are you?
I am well. I'm jealous of your sunshine. It's now rainy London and summer is over, but that's what the earth does. It tilts. And we're hitting the autumn equinox this weekend. So things that can only get darker.
Well, for the record, I miss London. I need to stomp around the streets with you. I think there's a scene in Ted Lasso showing some streets that you and I walk down.
So. They're often filming around here. Just so people don't know, I live by the river, which is a line from London's Burning. London's Calling, rather. And I live just south of the river and near the Tate Modern and London Bridge and all that. And they're often filming around here. And there's a great picture of us together, isn't there? On America Street. But right. They're often they're often blocky off streets around here because it's got this sort of gritty, warehouse locations, and the Borough of Southwark must make a fortune just sending off the streets. Anyway, so yes, I live in a photogenic place, but not as photogenic as you, Chris.
Well, and it's all good, but that sort of takes us down the path. So in the green room, we're talking about what we're going to talk about today. And you've been involved in communications and theater and drama and media, in many ways, for many years. You're currently, founder, co-founder, and editor of Byline Times, great newspaper. One of the metrics of that, I think I shared this with you. I'm coming back from London some years ago, and I'm talking to the person on the seat next to me, and they just threw your name out. It's the only person I'm reading now is Peter Jukes in Byline. It's like, really? It was fairly early in the.
Yeah, I think that $50 I paid in worked. We're getting quite influential. We were cited in the FBI warrants over the doppelganger thing. So yeah, we're having an impact.
So you reached an interesting point, and you're also a student of history, like myself. And you and I, got involved in political communication things around 2008, which is another story we may not get into today. But we can look all the way back, like literally all the way back. I love the cave paintings in Lascaux. I mean, this is one of the wonderful things that we've discovered during my lifetime, is that those cave paintings that I've seen since a child, those amazing records of, I think, 26,000 years ago, it's very long ago in human history, but we lit them up with electric lights. And then some smart bulb in the last decade said they didn't have electric lights. They had flickering torchlight. And it turns out all those grooves on those cave paintings, you put a flickering light on it and it's animation.
They've also 3D, I think it's Chauvet, the other cave, where the paintings are done around the shape of the rock. So these animals. And so they're not only into, animation, but 3D modeling. But the fascinating, and obviously, we know that culture existed way before that. And paintings, there are older paintings. But because, the way with the Ice Age, the retreat of the ice, that, the first Western Europe is settled, well, it had been settled many times, but after the last ice age 30,000 years ago, and that's where you find in northern Spain and southern France, all this art by Homo sapiens or whatever. But there was art, they now think, in Neanderthal. But I just use that example as why I have a problem with information theory and art as just information. For start there, often they're just talking about the image, the simplified information. Is that antelope? Is that a wolf? Is that, and miss the flickering torchlight that actually it's in such a way it's animated. There was the context of the 3D modeling around that rhino and the shape of the rock. But there's something else that's going on there, and that there's lots of information that's passed down archaeologically, which is not intentional. And there's a lot of old geology. It's not really intentional unless you believe God did it, by the way, and put the dinosaurs there. And there is a distinct, to me, category difference between, we used to call it between art and artifacts, between significance and meaning, or either meaning and significance. There's a difference between you find a footprint in the sand of an early Homo sapiens running away. They weren't contemporaneous with T-Rex. They wouldn't be running away from T-Rex, but they might have been running away from a saber-toothed tiger or woolly mammoth or something. That's unintentional. But when in Chauvet or Lascaux, those people, and they were largely women, a lot of them were women, but we know this at the moment, I'll tell you why. They were sending a message. They were, as you say, communicating, but there's an intention. There was an intelligence communicating to another intelligence, which is very different from, just finding out stuff by what people left behind. Why we know they're women is that one of the key things you find in early cave paintings, I think going back 80,000 years, even longer, is people stenciling their hands. It's a favorite thing to do. And what is being said there is, I was here. It's like graffiti. I existed. There is a shadow of me which will persist. And looking at the structure of those hands and the shape, and you can tell sometimes by the length of testosterone effects of finger length, a lot of them were women, which rather counteracts our idea of art. So I don't know, Chris, when we talk about information theory, and there's that James Gleick book, which I really admire, then Peter's out to me. And I think Noah, the guy who wrote Mankind, and Homo Deus has written, and the next book is about information theory, that what levels of information are being communicated. There's digital information. You can, in Turing's machine, it could emulate every other machine. That's the universal UTM, is they could emulate everything mechanical, could be emulated by a computer eventually. And we see that sort of in our smartphones. But can art be imitated? Because art is about the shape of the rock and the flickering light and the intentionality, and about atoms rather than electron. It's non-digital as far as I can see. The brain does not work on-off switches, does it? The synapses have 3 switches, kind of on-off maybe, and they're networked in a way. And I worry that this, and I have to think about it more, I'd love to write about more, that our emphasis on the brain as a computer, Steven Pinker used to make that analogy 20, 30 years ago, and looking at language, information processing in the same way as we look at a machine, is a little bit Frankensteinian. That, in the early, if you look at 19th century and 20th century literature, it's obsessed by robots looking like humans, right? That they'll walk around. And we know the biggest robots around are, driving cars or dropping bombs on Russians. And, the robot is nothing like, there's not a human analogy really between these robotized actions, except when you come to accountancy and law. And basically lawyers and accountants are robots anyway. But, and this brings to AI, is that this is the perfection of, or the improvement of, information gathering and distribution. I accept that. But it is not the higher level processing information. I always thought of it like primary and tertiary industry. The primary industry, like your oil drilling or your gas extraction, is data processing, is getting the information. And then the secondary process is turning that into knowledge. So what is this data set? So what knowledge does it give human beings? How does that help you cure cancer, or, distribute the right amount of supplies one way? But there's a tertiary level, which is wisdom and context. And as a newspaper man who was I still am a dramatist. I'm working on a big drama for Sky TV about Daniel Morgan murder, but that's another matter. I realized that you need that raw data, you need that information processed into knowledge, but who processes it into wisdom? And if you're looking at the primitive forms of data processing and expression of the cave painters, they had very low-level ways of amassing data about herds and, why the sun rose and all that stuff. But they had amazing tertiary-level expression, from the pyramids to the caves. And I don't think anything in I'm sorry, it's a bit of a peon, but I've got half an hour. I'm gonna have a little bit of a peon. Anything in the massive increase of data processing, the revolution in production, distribution, exchange of knowledge, of art, of journalism that's happened since the last 20 years, 30 years, which I wrote about in 1994. So that's 30 years ago. And this I said, like we all did, Chris, this is a revolution between, of production, distribution, exchange, very Marxist terms, would lead to the end of hierarchies and the growth of peer-to-peer and the rise of democracy, little realizing that most of it used for porn, lols cats, and now disinformation. Because that higher level processing of the relevance of this, what we're communicating, why we're communicating, is not being looked at.
Well, that's an amazingly perfect segue. So let me take porn, lols, cats, and disinformation, right? And pull us, so we've agreed, I think, here that I think there's arguments to be made. You can go back to early life communicating with chemical signatures and so forth. But in the human context, we're looking at hundreds of thousands, 500,000 years, maybe 1,000,000 years of people thinking about communicating and doing it in certain ways and developing habits and patterns and results. And we see this in artifacts in the last couple tens of thousands of years in cave paintings, as we're saying here. Then we get to, in those terms, the near recent past. I mean, you're right around the corner from where Shakespeare literally had the globe. And the last couple hundred years, we've gotten printing presses and, by stages, mass communications that the cave painters couldn't have imagined. And that leads us up to today very directly. These lines, I think, are founded on each other directly.
Yeah, so you go from, you're right. And so you used to walk by my street just there. Charles Dickens, in fact, the pub's called, it used to be called the Charles Dickens, it's now called Mac and Sons, but he used to walk, his dad was down the road in debtor's prison in Marshalsea. So he used to walk down my street. And you saw the revolution of the Elizabethan era and early Jacobean era, which was suddenly a middle class in London who'd pay to go and see shows nightly, which were in the English language, which were both highbrow and accessible, had car chases and soliloquies. That was an amazing moment, and it's a bit like Greek drama. The crystallization around the city, the ability to fund such an organization, get that critical mass of people who are interested, fairly literate. Britain was very early, quite literate. And then with Dickens, you get not only the rise of the printing press, which of course 200 years of religious war, you've got the daily serial, the author as celebrity, a lot of women now having, particularly women, but people having leisure time and literacy to consume this thing called the weekly chapter of the novel, made him a millionaire. Then he lost his money, then he had to go to America and do tours. So then you go to, of course, which like Shakespeare originated around here were the brothels, the stews, and bear baiting pits out of that sort of marginal society.
Porn and lols, cats.
So out of the peep show and end of peer entertainment arose cinema and movies. Lumiere brothers, who's the other famous one whose name escapes me at the moment, and they started doing documentaries or weird movies of the moon smiling and these special effects. There was Lumiere and the other people. One went very realistic, train coming towards you. The other one did, just weird special effects. You have both the fantasy and the documentary coming out of a very marginal bit of society. Then out of that, obviously, you get television and radio, a sort of part of the beginning of that mass electronic or mass production of image and sound. And then you get the other countercultural, Bill Gates, Wozniak, all these people hanging around with their, that bit overplayed, but their homebrew computers. Another marginal technology then becomes central. So in that way, you see it every day. I see it, you sit on the train, everybody's just glued to their phones, whatever they're doing. And somebody once did this funny thing is he'd got all these Edward Hopper pictures, and instead of books, he put phones and iPads in them. And so all these solitary people, very romantic to us, they're reading a book. Now, oh, look, they're looking at iPad, how terrible. But is it that different? Everyone would be reading the newspaper 20 years ago. Now they're on their phones. They're probably reading it. They're probably communicating to their loved ones. They may be sharing disinformation. They may be trolling somebody, but it's not profoundly different, is it?
No, right? And this is one of my favorite Canadian authors, Donald Jack. Has a historically based fictional series about a World War I Canadian World War I fighting ace, and all these wonderful historical tropes. But one of my favorite lines is talking about how he's falling into women and alcohol and trying to be an upstanding guy, and he says the next thing he's going to be reading novels. Yes. Right, because Pulp Fiction, right? And as we look at these spans of time, and particularly, we're living in an anglicized, post-anglicized world, and you're actually English, which oddly is sort of related. And we have the Industrial Revolution. And as I sit here thinking about it, I think you could make an argument, at least for conversational purposes, that the Victorian era, leading direct, coming from before and leading directly into the Industrial Revolution, gives us a really good model for really intentionally weaponized influence campaigns, misinformation campaigns that we're still untangling today. They probably have a lot to say about, the more timely issues people are worried about in this century.
Yeah, I think one good example of that is that, look at Elon Musk and Twitter X, is, here's a rich man wanting to have his say. Now, every newspaper was a rich man, invariably, maybe Nancy Astor was different, wanting to have their say, because they never made many money until a brief window of about 100, 150 years, when the Times started selling advertising on the front page. It became independent. It actually made money, right? Otherwise, journalism has been funded. The print price never paid anything except the cost of the printing it. To pay for the journalism, the writing was advertising. And that model's been disrupted, ruined by Google and Facebook and others. So now you've got rich people taking over media organizations here, funding at a loss for political influence. In a way, though Elon Musk, is only running a platform and we're the authors, reality is he's gaming us to have his say. And we're back to quite a historical model. Hearst, Pulitzer, Murdoch. We had Beaverbrook. We had two, Beaverbrook and Northcliffe, were so influential 100 years ago in the cabinet, in newspapers. They owned two newspaper groups. They became members of the cabinet. So Elon Musk wanted to run this.
Lord Rackingham.
Yeah. Rupert Murdoch's dad was called Lord Southcliffe because he was very influential in British papers even then. So on that score, you're right. There's the plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. What I think is slightly different is that and I don't know what you feel about this, you have a better answer to me. The classic line, when the product's free, you are the product. Though they could do it to a certain extent, and they did readers' polls and things like that. Classic broad channel broadcast, top down, we produce a newspaper, a TV show, a radio show, couldn't really gather the data of their readers and listeners and viewers. So what we have now, the BBC, they do polls, they could do, advertisers want to know their Nielsen ratings and what people liked and which cheeses they liked also, but they couldn't go through every bit of your data and emotionally profile you and sell on that data to third parties, sometimes for advertising targeting, increasingly for political targeting. And I think that level of what is called surveillance capitalism. So I think it's just to close this down, I think in a way what we're talking about is that while the technology changes and is liberating for a while, back to Shakespeare, back to cave painting, there's probably an oligarch in the cave painting scenes. Well, especially with, social media, it becomes liberating and kind of outside and a citizen. Then people realize money is to be made, and then monopoly starts happening. And somehow it's particularly powerful with anything that's got a network effect, is that I'm on Blue Sky, right? But how do you build an equivalent to Twitter that quickly? Because you're only on Twitter because other people are on Twitter, right? That's the only reason. And so the peer-to-peer element actually allows this very flat thing, but a very high, at the top of it, one person pushing the algorithm his way. I think there's a equivalent on that in other sectors. And what's his name? Varoufakis calls, you have surveillance capitalism, which Shabov, she talks about. But then what the Greek economist Varoufakis talks about is cloud capitalism, i.e., it is nowhere. So the days of Standard Oil, when they had that monopoly, and along comes the other Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt, he does his trust busting. Standard Oil had its trains going through New York State, had its mines in Pennsylvania. He could do something about it. If it's up in the cloud, where is it?
Well, I think the classic, and it's one of these silly quotes that actually is real. The classic story of I think it was an American ambassador asking a Chinese ambassador what they thought of the French Revolution, and the
Oh,
answer was, "It's too early to tell."
show and lie. Yes, that's right.
And I if I worry about anything, it's this one. I believe that the arc of history drives towards democracy and freedoms and in improving state for human individuals in the world. Right? I could be wrong. Maybe and because when we look at long time frames, we could be talking about like forever, thousands and tens of thousands of years from now. It sounds silly. We have a hard time with those time frames, but we can look back tens of thousands of years. Tens of thousands of years from now will happen. Will we live in a world that is, and it's easy to forecast now, is dominated by a handful of rich individuals and everybody else is a slave? Is that the steady state? Or are we driving in the other direction? And this is sort of how I come down with the whole inevitability curve idea. It's not any one thing, but I think what we see in these patterns from cave paintings through Shakespeare, through the French Revolution and so forth, is that as information moves around, there's a whole lot of not wanna that drives things. And when kind of everybody doesn't want to, whatever it is we're talking about, well, all as a population and cultures tend away from it. So there's so much dystopian stuff.
Yeah, and it doesn't happen.
Yeah, but and down this whole path from, again, Shakespeare, you can look at that era and say, oh, I'm a political power, I have an interest, I will influence that in my own nefarious ways to guide. And then through the things that we touched on, the British expansion, Victorianism, and so forth, getting that message uniformly, spread around the world. The early printing and journalism you talked about to the empires of today. Are we driving continually down that road? And I'll throw out. So where are we in time? 20 minutes, and we should move into the future. Because I have, as a technology person, as a cybersecurity person, given the stuff I'm working on right now with cybersecurity and critical infrastructure and supply chains, I see a future where we have to have technology that makes transparency, appropriate transparency, really fast. I'm like, right now. I want to know right now where my information is, who's touched it, where it's been, is that being handled by all the agreements all the way up the information chain. Yes, so you're an actual journalist, I say something to you, we agree on how that information is going to be handled. I want to see that. Or if somebody, I agree to pay my taxes, and I agree that the local city council and the province and the state and the nation get to spend that in various ways, governed by various rules, but I don't want to have to make a hobby out of it to figure out one piece of that. I want to see it all right now. And I think that sort of transparency may, on one hand, instill the kind of trust I think we need as societies, and may also make it harder and harder to get the nefarious benefit by dominating, as history has shown us, being rich and owning a channel.
That's a very good point. And it's a generational thing. 2016, you saw it in Brexit and with the Trump vote. It is my generation, internet unsavvy or a disinformation unaware, who are most swung by the disinformation going around there. So this is always a huge paradox to me. Yes, you're right. As the problem is, as information becomes more of it, right? Who are the trusted gatekeepers? How do you interpret it? And what happens, especially happened with COVID, is people can't discriminate between, don't have a scientific training, between an interesting story and a complete pack of lies, which will kill them. And why I am more optimistic, I side with you on that optimism, is that actually, I will tell you an anecdote. Somebody wanted, a young female journalist of color rang me. Said, can I work for bilateral internship? And we spoke on, I said, let's have a chat on the phone. It's about a week ago. And I said, I'm really interested in investigative journalism. Okay, that's great, and stories untold. I thought you'd say something about racism or something. Said that. I think particularly around the vaccine. Okay. What about Bill Gates? Well, I think it's got lots of questions to answer. And I'm going, and she said, nobody tells these stories. I've done my own research. Dread words. I've done my own research. And it was very unusual for a young person, because I think, they tend to be a bit more savvy about Occam's razor. Where's the sourcing? But I tell you this, Chris, I think the thing that always amazes me, I've been on a couple of flights recently, I'm looking out the window, they're building a big skyscraper, cantilevered, 2 blocks. I wish I could turn the camera around and show you. Shall I do it quickly? Anyway.
Oh, sure, why not? It's
There
a
you
podcast.
go. Can you see through your seat? Look,
Oh yeah, there it is. It light adjusted. Yep.
And you can see that's a lovely building behind it. They're going to block it out. But the thing about that is, and they're building 2 more after that, every micrometer is measured. They come with their surveying things. It's got to be transported on time. The beams have to. It's made of wood, by the way. It's one of the first buildings in New York, I think, totally made of wood. The floors are made of wood, coming from Canada. The amount of truth, of accuracy, to get a plane to fly, to get the GPS to work, to get the protocols that I could talk to you down this. A whole world is constructed on millions and millions of agreed truths. You don't have an opinion about an IP protocol. You can't have an opinion about, I want to cantilever it this way, or the glass, maybe it's that big. And yet, out of the benefit of all these millions of agreed facts, which allow us to talk, we talk shit. And so, there is that point, and I've met a lot of COVID skeptics. One used to write for us. I see this information, these just lies, basically. And, when it comes to science and COVID, it becomes very dangerous. It's dangerous enough when it's Trump, Russia, or some who's committed atrocity there or whatever. But you can't, we know that, you're going to die if you eat deadly nightshade rather than blackberries. We know if you go, it's just my opinion as a pilot where the airport is, you're going to die and kill everybody, But I do think there is that crucial moments happen, and maybe this transparency helps, whereby, you could know your village. And we've had this with cities coming. That was a massive, happened, obviously. There were huge cities in and in Egypt 5,000-6,000 years ago. London was the biggest city in Europe 500 years ago. But authority, some and modernly churches, posh people, lords, whatever, kings, they had authority. And Shakespeare shows, where that goes. And that's probably why he was a radical force for the spread of more Enlightenment values. And certainly getting the English language better did help the empire, then helped our colonial covenants do quite well after they peeled away, rather unfortunately. But that sense of, that you can't know anything now. One of the votes in the Brexit referendum, one of the senior Leave campaigners, who was a minister, said, we've had enough of experts. So that mismatch between, I can vaguely understand how a car works. Not anymore, actually. Used to, I could change the light. You can't change the light bulb. I think a lot of people get their heads around a steam engine, certainly know how ox team would work. As the world gets more complicated, the dangers are that we don't grasp it. We don't see the transparent. We don't see the audit trail of information. We don't trust it. And then we fall into these very simplistic World Economic Foundation, lizards, wokes,
and I want space lizards, but I'm pretty sure they're not here. Yes.
Yeah. And so what are the calculations? So is there a terminal? Remind me of the name? Inevitability
Curve. Yes.
Is there an inevitability curve?
It is a bit of a tongue twister. Yes. So drink.
No. But is there is there a reverse Moore's law? Is there a way Moore's law is now, over? It's not accelerating the same rate. Getting to the limits of nanocomputing and quantum computing that you keep on growing. But is there an information overload with empires? And Paul Kennedy used to talk about this. There's the imperial overstretch, the classic. Once they had 40 bases, the Romans collapsed. America's got 40 bases. You could look at their naval reach, their imperial reach, and there becomes a point where you get the diseconomies of scale. Are we getting some huge diseconomy of information? And would that explain why we're alone in the universe? Because one of the theories is that why we haven't been visited by aliens is obviously impossibilities of distance. The nearest habitable planet is probably 2 light years away. That's traveling at the speed of light, and we can travel 30,000 miles an hour, whatever it is, which is way short, and then still people fall apart. So, but also the problem of coterminism. So what some people think is, yes, you've got these billions of stars, millions of planets. Now you've got quite a low, you've got chance of life, some kind of replication forming there. Intelligent life, much more difficult because you tend to have like mitochondria merging with amoeba. You need sort of some fusion to happen to provide the extra energy. But yeah, that would probably happen millions of times. The chances are, given the universe is 14 billion years old, are unlikely to be coterminous. Why? Because the estimate of the lifetime of civilization is a maximum, 1,000,000 years. So 14 billion years, right? I know you maybe disagree with this, but the idea that, you let alone have the technology or the space transport to communicate with them, because it still take, 2 years to get a radio signal back, forwards and back, the civilization would be alive at the same time. So that's where the big numbers come in to sort of ask you. And the fact that we haven't been visited by aliens would lend one to the assumption, either through ecological change, but you would have thought if they were smart enough, intelligent enough, and had enough technology, they could overcome that or recolonize. But actually, and I look at Elon Musk's plan for recolonization, and I can see humanity ending quite quickly.
Well, yeah, this episode is going to have to end way sooner than I would like it to, but this is an interesting one to have the last exchange on, because I have believed in every step. I believed in a lot of conspiracy theories in my life. They make sense and to get inside them, and you know me, I get really enthusiastic, and before long, I usually find, but it doesn't work anymore. And the aliens, obviously, it's everything you said. It's a big universe. There seem to be amino acids are formed spontaneously in nebulas by high energy particles, and the pieces are all around. But I've been approaching the rare earth hypothesis regretfully, resistantly, but I think you touched on it. We used 80% of the habitable time on this planet to get one version of sentience. If it took 110%, we wouldn't get there, right? And maybe we on average happen fairly quickly. I think intelligent life might be vanishingly rare, and there doesn't seem to be any in this galaxy. No sign anywhere else. And there's relatively conservative mathematics that can have you say odds are having 2 in 1 visible volume of space is probably low order. But I think we're going to find this out. I don't expect to live thousands of years, but I hope to see in a couple of thousand years, see that we've sort of figured this one out, right? And I think this issue is key, because if it is a forever cycle of Shakespearean drama where it's just going to be the tyrants take over, and so that's not sustainable. And there are lots of endpoints, but I think we're driving today these conversations. You and I have them all the time. Lots of folks, not just information geeks like you and I, our friends and family and the quote unquote regular folks, they would be happier with a simpler model, where you can actually have some reasonable trust in the information you actually get. And everybody's grumpy. All my friends on all the extremes would just like to have a little better transparency so they could, get really angry about something or not.
And I think that's the cure to the the inevitability curve is that we inevitably progress, we inevitably decline or blow up. I mean, that's a lot of the interest in Israel, Palestine through evangelicals is for the rapture. A lot of people, I actually didn't end up writing it, but I was going to after my first book, write about the images of the end, how we all long for the narrative of the end. We'd like to be the last. We'd like nobody to survive after us. And
what the tie of the box, the story, how's the story end? Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So there is it's up to play for. Is it inevitable to survive? Is it neither? And just back to your main point, that self-correction, I completely agree. And I've seen people de-radicalize when they're told, no, this information, they got that fact wrong. How can all the scientists in the world, 30,000 of them, all agree in a conspiracy to Bill Gates?
They can't agree on lunch.
Right? Exactly. And surely one of them told the stories, they'd make a fortune. We'd publish it, we'd pay them. It's like that famous story about all the Jewish people in New York got a text not to go into the World Trade Center on 9/11. Well, I'm sure somebody would leak that text. So the you know, if you somehow, that's learning, isn't it? It's error correction. And that only comes from what you're talking about, transparency. And I've done it wrong. I've retweeted a fake image, you know, and you go, and it's probably the best moment we can do it. I've got that wrong. That is not reliable. I got a bit of false information there. I mustn't do that again. And it's, and hopefully, eventually, when these culture wars decline, it isn't a matter of, oh, you know, MAGA personal, you know, lib, you know, owning them for getting it wrong. It becomes a different process of, we all get things wrong. How can we all learn and not do it wrong the next time? And, you know, when I look at this building going up, you know, nobody dies anymore. In construction sites in New York in the 30s, around here, people are dying the trains. Very few. I have a very quiet street, has traffic calming. Cars can't go faster than 30 miles an hour. I try my bike. Everything's got better. I mean, there's no fumes because we've got an ULEZ thing put in by Sadiq Khan. And after smoking's banned indoors, I like occasional cigar. I don't mind that. Going to ban it outdoors in pubs. I don't mind that because actually people are living longer and healthier. And science, statistics, clarity of information gets us, we've learned how to learn.
And I think we're going to continue to do so. So thank you, Peter, for the time today. You know, for all the time over the years for listening to me sing karaoke in London. I apologize for that. So thank you for putting on the brave face.
We still haven't recovered, actually.
No, I can only imagine. So thank you, everyone else, for your time today. Look forward to talking to you next time. Have a good tomorrow.